Okay. Hi, and welcome to Tech Leader TV. I'm your host, John Thomas Flynn, and this is now our 10th year of Tech Leader TV, believe it or not. Since our first show back in, what would it have been, 2007 with the intrepid Clark Kelso, who was CIO of the state then. My successor, twice removed, I guess it was. Anyway, we come to you today courtesy of our sponsors, Unisys, Dimension Data, LexisNexis, Gigaman. Did I mention Dimension Data, didn't I? Yeah, sure, okay. And Veeam, of course, looking around the room here. I think that's everybody. Did I miss anybody? Live, nothing like a live show, right? Oh, and our newest sponsor, IP Solutions, securing government networks across the state. And we're in for a real treat today. We just got back, some of us at least, from a tour of the Cal-CSIC, what is it called? The Systems?
California Cybersecurity Integration Center.
There you go. And we just got back, and now we're going to interview Mr. Tresh, Keith Tresh, who's no stranger to Tech Leader TV. He's been on here before. He's got an interesting background. He's not only currently the commander of Cal-CSIC, he also was the CISO for Orange County, and then he was CIO for, well, then state CISO, and then he was CIO for the High-Speed Rail Authority. So I guess you can't keep a job. Is that what it comes down to? Say, welcome to the show, Keith.
Thank you, John. Yeah, so you're trying to say I have a checkered past, but that's true. It's funny because before all of those, I was in the military for 33 and a half years, and my IT experience, same office from 1993 until 2011, just coming up from voice to data to networks, or to help desk to networks, and then the deputy CIO or J6, and then the J6 for 5 years. So very proud of my military heritage there. So
well, thank you for your service.
I appreciate that. It's great for me because this is kind of like a coming home, and as I mentioned to the folks on the tour, this is kind of my quest, and the passion for the cyber security within the state is huge for me. And when this opportunity presented itself from Director Ghilarducci, I was very happy to come aboard because it's actually great to see California maturing in its resilience. In cyber, and I've got the utmost respect for Director Ghilarducci. And
a much easier commute, I might add, right?
I don't know about that. I live in Rockland. So
well, we're glad to have you on the show. Because of that background, I think it gives you kind of a unique perspective, which we'll get into a little bit. But first, a lot of the stuff is going to be repetitive for the folks on the tour. But tell us a little bit about your organization and the leadership, your staffing, your budget, that kind of thing that people are interested in.
So the CalCSIC itself was formed back from the Cyber Task Force that was created by the Governor's Office and through OES back in 2012. And I have to say that through the leadership of Director Maribel Badger and Director Ghilarducci, Amy Tong, and the Assembly Member Challoner, and then Tom Meyer from the Governor's Office, we have some great executive sponsors. But it was formed to be the oversight for California, and all of California, not just state entities, but to focus on California entities, but state entities, I mean, and then but to actually do a whole of government, whole of California enterprise solution. So my program is it is funded through a Homeland Security grant, and my staffing currently we have myself plus 3 other folks that are being vetted and hopefully have aboard within the next couple of weeks. But we also have a lot of very integral and important partners. We have what we call the 4 core partners that we work with, and that is Department of Technology, Department of the Military, the Highway Patrol, and Peter Liebert's office, the State Information Security Office. And it's one of those things where we are very much in sync, and we all have the same focus and end state in mind, and that's great. We have a great relationship. Peter Liebert from CISO office, who you interviewed fairly recently, he and I have a great relationship. Scott Howland from CHP, and then Colonel Parsons, Ken Foster from the military department that we deal with all the time. Great partnership, great team, and we're focused on that resilience and maturity within cybersecurity.
Yeah, and I seem to recall there were some state staff auditors or something that you were looking at hiring. Is that just on the compliance side?
No. So there's a couple of things going on within the state realm, and so the military department is overseeing and doing most of the information security audits. Assessments.
Yeah, it's
assessments. Thank you.
Right.
For the agencies to do their vulnerabilities and cyber maturity. On Peter's side, on the Information Security Office side, OIS as it's called, they are responsible for the audits. Mm-hmm. Okay, so Peter's got auditors so the information security assessments look at the systems and the networks and those kind of things. The auditors are looking at the people and the practices and the standards. Mm-hmm. So they're two separate entities.
One of the things that came up during our tour was the risk assessment. Now, is the risk assessment, is that what the departments do themselves, and then it's reviewed by the auditors and the assessment people and the auditors?
Yes. The risk assessment is something that everybody, each one of the entities is responsible for and should be doing. And as we kind of talked about on the tour, if they're not really doing the assessment, it's kind of hard to know what you're protecting or what you should be protecting. So, mm-hmm. Yes, it's incumbent upon each one of the entities to do their own risk assessments, and then they are reviewed by Peter's office, but they are reviewed and or looked at through the audit process. In other words, they're looking at, have you done a risk assessment as part of the audit?
Mm-hmm. Just a little bit about how it fits together, because it is somewhat confusing, because I know you said that your organization is, well, let me back up. Peter Liebert's organization is the jurisdiction is the state, but yours is different. Why don't you describe that a little bit?
Yeah, and it's the function and the responsibility for the State Information Security Officer, Officer of Information Security, Peter Liebert's office, that hasn't changed. They have responsibility for all the state entities and the security and maturity of their systems and networks. The CalCSIC's responsibility is much more broad. Again, going back to the whole of government, whole of California, and per the executive order, we're looking at the state and having oversight and play in that, but then we look at bringing in the county, the locals, the municipals, the CSUs and the junior colleges, the electrical and all the utilities, and then also the private sector as partners, and so that we can be looking at, sharing, and kind of working through all the threat intelligence that we get through them.
Mm-hmm. And again, talking about jurisdiction, there's also one of the things that comes up is the STAC, the State Threat Assessment Center. How does that fit into all this?
Good question. So when the CalCSIC was formed, it was decided to co-locate the CalCSIC, Cybersecurity Integration Center, with the State Threat Assessment Center, or STAC. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is manifold, but the biggest one was to share resources. The State Threat Assessment Center does all of the assessments on threats non-cyber. Okay, so it's law enforcement, it's terror, all of the things, and they already had all the resources and the networks to kind of look through that. Now, before the CalCSIC, they were also looking at cyber, but now that the CalCSIC isn't there, we focus on the cyber piece of it, and they're still doing the terror threats. We're housed in the same building and or room, so that we have access to all of the systems they already had aboard. So it's a great marriage, and my partner Eli Owen, who's the deputy commander of the STAC, we work hand in hand to look at all of the threats, because I think, as anyone in this room would attest to, a lot more of the threats that are coming out there have a cyber component to them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, for sure. Also, there's a couple other entities I wanted to discuss and just get clarification on. Of course, you have the Attorney General, Department
Mm-hmm.
of Justice, who has certainly has a role in terms of being notified about breaches,
Mm-hmm.
et cetera. How does that play into what you're doing?
Again, another good question. So I did not mention the Department of Justice and the Attorney General's office, but they are also a key and integral partner. So I think everyone understands on the state side that the California Highway Patrol, anytime there's anytime there's something that's deemed as criminal, the CHP must be involved to do that criminal side of the investigation, whether it's cyber or non-cyber. So And the CCIU, there, or Computer Crimes Investigation Unit, is a combined DOJ and CHP entity that's currently out off Broadway. And they are the folks that do all those investigations. So to get to your specific point, the Highway Patrol has jurisdiction on anything that's a state entity. But if there's a criminal element in any of the breaches or anything that comes up on incidents, and it is not specifically a state entity, then the DOJ is involved because they have jurisdiction throughout the state.
And that brings up that point that we discussed at the end of the tour about the anonymous nature of notification. To tell us about how that policy works.
Sure.
And why it was instituted.
Well, the biggest thing is to ensure that we gain and maintain the trust of the entities that we're working with.
And those would include everything from state departments to utilities, private sector?
All utilities, everything. The key is that the reason we want information, we share information, and why we're involved with these folks is to help them, not to air their dirty laundry, not to make them feel bad, not to show them or call them out. So what we are doing and working very closely with our partners in OIS and Peter's office, very much so in the mix on this, is to ensure, and we you can't demand that you have trust. We're going out and showing folks, hey, if you've got an incident, let's walk through it, talk through it, and help you get through it. And then we will only use the data or the information that we glean from that to help other entities. We're not going to share, oh, by the way, it was this agency that had this issue. It's, hey, we have an entity that had a phishing scam, for example, and so be on the lookout for whatever. So that piece is absolutely critical, then, anonymity of it, so that folks know that we're here to help them, not to, make their lives miserable or to air their dirty.
But I was under the impression, I don't know what bill it is, but I was under the impression that the AG had to be notified about breaches.
Oh, my apologies. Yes. So if there's certain circumstances, so if there's 500 records or more of personally identifiable information, PII, or HIPAA data and that kind of things, okay? Those are the kinds of things. There are thresholds for different types of incidents that agencies and entities must report to the Department of Justice, and it's based on the number of records that
And
they're
there's
exposed.
tens of thousands each year, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
I looked at it a year or so ago, and it was, in some state entities, but primarily 90% were private sector, a lot of UCs, a lot of state colleges.
Yeah, there was a lot of hospitals and UCs and universities had some stuff last year that was very ugly, and they were targeted a lot last year. So it was.
I'm kind of diverging a little bit from some of the questions, but this kind of came up when we talked before the show, and that was, if I was CIO or department now, putting on my CIO hat, I'd want to put in place, a superstructure, if you will, of tools and solution sets to prevent all types of various security issues.
Good luck with that.
Well, is that what? So why is there a template for something like that? That you need this for endpoint, you need this for incident tracking, you need this. I mean, how does that whole portfolio work? If I'm a department, I'm saying, hey, how can I get on top of this thing?
Well, there's a couple of aspects to it, and I think if I'd be getting ugly stares from most of the folks in the room if I said it's, you can get it all done. But I'm going to go back to a term that's fairly old, defense in depth. But also, starting with, you have to know your systems and what systems are critical to you and your mission. Because you could spend all of your budget on security. So you have to be able to pick and choose what you think is most important, because if you're going to go out and say we're going to protect everything to the nth degree, you're not going to be able to do it. So that's why it's critical to do the risk assessment, and that's why it's critical for all of the entities to do, what is our critical data, what are our critical systems, what are the systems we need to absolutely operate, and that's how you build your security. You build it based on the criticality factor of it. So, and that's where you start as a CIO. You want to protect those. It's not saying you don't protect the other systems.
Right.
You just protect them more at that level, because it is quite expensive.
And how would you?
Let's
Let's say you've got your typical state database with names and social security numbers, maybe even health records. What would your plan? Where did it start?
So, there's a.
I don't want to put you on the spot.
No, it's a lot of different aspects. So one of the things, and one of the big hospital breaches. So I would tell you, one of the things that I always look at for is encryption while you're in transport, but even bigger, encryption at rest. Meaning, if your data is not encrypted at rest, especially when you have critical data like that, you're putting yourself and opening yourself up for some big potential issues.
And, and just to amplify that, a lot of times when you see these big breaches like Office of Personnel Management in the federal government, that all the background checks, you, me, anybody that had a clearance with the feds, that data was hacked. And that turned out because it was simple security issues weren't followed, security compliance issues.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point. That goes back to basics. So one of the things, and we talk about this almost every day with all of my security counterparts, and that is training and awareness for every one of the employees, because I will tell you, still the number one issue you've got is people clicking on a link that they shouldn't click on.
Tell us about your gentleman. I think it was a man who does the phishing. He does a example where he sends emails out.
I have to give some shout out to Michael Cruz, who's our information security officer for Cal-CSIC. He's got a program that actually it actually sends out fake phishing emails. And the good news about that is we have the ability to control where the links go. So fairly recently, in fact, it was last week, I got this email. There's something about Pokemon Go. And I'm like, hey, you need to click here. So I sent it back to Michael. I said, yeah, I think this is a scam. And he says, yeah, that's one of my phishing emails. So what we're doing, and even if even with all of this training, I was at PG&E tabletop exercise yesterday for cyber yesterday, and one of the things they brought up was they still have about, and I guys, it's arguable, but I've heard up to 30% of people still click on them. PG&E did a test, and they were down to around below 10%. So that's actually good, but still, all it takes is one.
I know.
The whole analogy of,
how did your organization do?
Michael is working on that, and we have a lot of good. It actually was below 10% as well, but it doesn't matter. People are so busy. Sometimes they get so engrossed they don't look at it. So it's something you have to just keep reinforcing.
Can you give us their names?
No. I think John Flynn.
Just kidding. But it is. It's like over and over again. That's really. It's not surprising. It's like you say, it's human nature, particularly, and it's funny how it's just the basics. It makes so much of a difference.
It is, and the scarier ones are the ones, I don't know if you guys use the term anymore, whale fishing. I mean, where folks, they'll take the credentials or supposed credentials or an email from the director of an agency from their personal mail and send it to people and say, hey, I need you to send me this, click here or whatever, or send me this. And those are tough to combat, because somebody sees their supervisor or somebody big in the organization and say, oh, this has got to be legit because it's coming from them. And so that's where you have to have people at least question it, and that by nature people are wanting to, abide by the rules. So.
Yeah, for sure. We've touched, mentioned anyway, private sector. How do you work with the private sector? I know it's understandable how you do with government, but how do you work with all the other entities?
So one of our the biggest partnership place and where we interact with all of our counterparts is through our cyber task force. And but we also have a lot of friends out there, that we use their products, but also that have been, they're state vendors that work at different entities. We're sharing best practices with them. One of the things that we do say, though, on the Cyber Task Force is if you want to be a member of the Cyber Task Force, you have to be willing to be vendor agnostic. In other words, share best practices, not trying to peddle your wares. And that's a huge thing, but there are a lot of, we've got many vendors on the Cyber Task Force that are there. They share the best practices. We share best practices back and forth. We share intel, threat intel, and vulnerabilities back and forth. And that's huge, because a lot of times, obviously, the private sector's seeing these things. There's a couple of big cyber breaches and or FBI things that have happened in the news the last few days, and there's some vendors that are out there being progressive and out there with the feds doing these things, and they have a lot of good intel. So that's why it's very important to be with them.
Is membership in that task force still open?
it is always open. We encourage.
How do you sign up?
So one of the things that, and I don't have my little slide that shows our little email account, but basically contact me and we'll set you up, let you be on the task force and to actively participate in it. We have several hundred folks that are actually signed up in it, and we are looking to expand, but also make sure that folks that attend are serious about wanting to help the state.
Yeah, and I think some of our sponsors are also members
So,
now.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good idea. It's probably, as it gets larger, it may be difficult to coordinate and stuff, but at least you have at least you can also, is it break up into task forces, or?
Subcommittees.
Yeah, subcommittees.
Right, and we're going to have another task force meeting in late May, and one of the things that we're in the process of doing right now is refocusing with Director Ghilarducci and Amy Tong on the priorities for this year for the task force, because we want to make sure we stay focused, and we're looking at the things that are going to be important to the state this year. So we've come up with new priorities, Peter and I directly, because we are the working co-chairs through our executive sponsors, and we've already got the blessing to get there, but we're going to refocus and start having those subcommittees, and that's where the folks can get on the subcommittees, and but we want them to have an end state and a sure focus of that subcommittee. It's not just hey, let's get together and talk.
That actually is some of the next question I was going to ask. What are your goals for the next 12 to 18 months?
To become a value add to the state and all of our partners, and we talked a little bit about this on the tour, is there are so many different feeds, there are so many different things that people can go out and get feeds from MSISAC through the fusion centers and all of the different cyber entities. Our goal is to become the go-to value add for, hey, we've got this threat intel or an assessment of something, and we're going to correlate it specifically to state systems or partner systems and or entities, and then give recommendations. So the
and you're
goal
primarily in front of the issue.
Trying to be in front, but also, so yes, the primary is, but also if there is something that's recognized somewhere else in another entity or from the private sector that says, hey, we've got something that we know is going on, they're targeting government or whatever, then forwarding that to folks and saying, hey, be on the lookout, if you will.
Oh, that's like I say, it's better than be reactive all the time, which has probably been the case in recent past, right?
Yeah, and it's tough. In security, it's hard to always be out in front because, they're always changing their tactics. But that's why we're always, doing our diligence and ensuring that we are looking at everything, and we've got that's why all the different partners are very, it's important because, sometimes you get stale with a certain feed or certain, so we need to always be looking out and looking at new venues and partners.
And it's a big deal. I know when we were over during the tour looking at the big screen in the war room there, there's news feeds coming in every few seconds, and one of them said cybersecurity, the cost of cybersecurity breaches is $3 trillion, with a T, $trillion a year, and it'll double that by 2021. I mean, you're talking real money here.
Yeah, it's because you have organized crime out there, and you've got petty criminals out there. They just took down one of the biggest Russian spammers, and he was responsible for a lot of money and Bitcoin mostly. But so yeah, it's. And it can vary. It always varies based on the number and size of the breaches, and what entity is. Healthcare data is more viable, and you can get more money for compromised health records than necessarily PII records.
Interesting.
So it changes. Yeah, it's got its own monetary value out there as well.
Yeah. What about you got your goals? So what about your in 2017, 2018 budget? What are you looking for your organization? You got any major new funding, or what's going on?
Our initiatives, we're in the process now of putting a threat intelligence platform in place, and that's a big portion of that, and then also a threat assessment platform.
Okay.
A threat analysis platform.
Will any of these involve procurements of one kind or another?
The procurements have happened for these two. But one of the other things that Peter and I are looking at, it's really Peter's initiative, but we're supporting it, is endpoint protection. We're looking at doing those kinds of things, and those are the kinds of things that will obviously be competitively bid. And then, but our big initiatives are to become more mature, more resilient by getting out in front of it, like you said, through our tip and tap that we're putting in place, so that the partner agencies have a much better lens on what's going on, because some of these folks don't have the resources to be looking at their stuff all the time. And that's where we come to the table and bring that resource to them. And that is my goal for this year.
Okay. I want to talk about, well, one of the things that interests me in particular when it comes to governance, the CIO governance model, and now we have the CISO governance model. And again, with your background as having a number of these, wearing a number of these hats over the years, describe the relationship between the CIO and the CISO, how they should be working together. Because sometimes it's like this. You talk to some CISOs, I shouldn't be reporting to the CIO. And you get other CIOs that are very strong CIOs and demand that thing. And then you've got other organizations, particularly outside of government, where the CISO reports directly to the CXO of some kind.
Yeah, and that's an arguable thing that, is debated all the time. I will tell you, every CIO SO position I've had, I've worked for the CIO. It's all about relationships. And one of the things that we fight, and I've talked through this with you before, and that is technical folks, more specifically security folks, have a tendency to be skies falling, or can be presumed to always being bearer of bad news. So it's about building that relationship and making sure that the CIO knows that I've got your back from the security perspective, and building that. And it's not about, hey, I'm calling you out. It's, let's work on this together. So as long as the CIO and the CISO are working together and they have that, those conversations, because the CISO should be saying, this is the risk you have. Here are the systems, and here are the risks that you're facing, and together they should be coming up with solutions and or taking them to the bosses on what do we protect the most, kind of thing. So that's the best way to, I guess, to kind of talk through how that should work. It's
interesting. I think I mentioned this before, that I read in Fortune about the CISOs and board of directors, and it said if you're on the board of directors and don't know the name of your CISO, you're in big trouble, and you have a fiduciary responsibility to build that relationship, because it's so critical. I mean, it can take down a company, it can take down a governor, for that matter. Yeah, it's certainly taken down a couple of CISOs, I know that, and CIOs.
Yeah, Target's a good example of that one. But that is absolutely true, and there's actually, I've been to several conferences now, and one of the tracks, one of the themes, one of the things that they put on is how to brief your bosses into, usually the board, on, what to expect in a breach. Because again, everybody says it's not a matter of if, it's when, and how large or, how small it is. So they've got to understand it's going to happen. And if you wait until something happens to start talking to your bosses or the board, then you're going to be in trouble, because they're going to go, why did this happen? So that's why it's really critical to have that open relationship with them, so that if something comes up, and this is something I promised to my boss and through all the way up to the governor's office, is I always tell my boss, bad news, I will get you the bad news as soon as I know it, because bad news does not get better with age, and I don't want him to hear about bad news somewhere else. So that's what our job is as security folks, is to let everyone know, even if it's something that's potential, hey, this is going on. And so anytime we've got something that we're looking at, I always let the boss know, hey, just so you know, in case you hear about it, because he does get those calls from the governor's office, from legislatures, hey, do you know about what's going on? And if he doesn't know, then I'm not doing my job. Right.
Well, it's a tough job, and also, just to go back to the money side of it, if you've got these the military assessments going on, you've got compliance audits going on, and obviously they're going to come up with a stack of issues that need to be, and issues cost money. So how does it go from an issue to getting money to address it? So, not that I expect you to, that's a tough question, I know, because of all the other priorities, but
So, and again, and we have Department of Finance involved in these conversations, and again, kudos to my boss, Director Gilducci and Amy Tong, for getting Department of Finance involved, so they know, hey, we're doing these audits, we're doing these assessments, and out of the assessments come what we call a program of action and milestones, or a POAM. So they're identifying critical, high, mediums, and low levels of risk and or vulnerabilities. So when that comes out, once you have the assessment and they put the POAM together, you then prioritize. You've got to get the criticals. The criticals and highs you want to focus on. So right now, what's going on is once they're identified, they're supposed to look internally to make sure, and they're supposed to reprioritize funds. Okay. If it goes above and beyond that, then it's incumbent upon that entity or agency to go through their director to go to Department of Finance and say, we're going to need additional assistance. We haven't gotten there yet, knock on wood, but there is the capability there, and it's a process that they have to follow to ensure that because if you let's for instance you have a lot of you have an issue with a cyber breach, and a year ago you came up and you had a lot of critical vulnerabilities, and oh, by the way, the breach happened via one of those critical, and you spent couple $1 million on a new system, and you didn't put it in security. So that's the kind of thing that they have to, the CIOs and the network. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's the kind of
to
information that the executives need, because they're the ones that are going to be called up when to the legislature.
And that's why the CIO and the CISO have to be lockstep and communicating that up through their chain of command, that we have these issues and have a plan, not wait till something happens.
Right, and that prioritization, again, that's what we had to do in year 2000 when I was CIO. We said, no more new projects until the mitigation had been done for Y2K, and it was a big fight, obviously, because some of these big projects, how long they take to get going, this just delayed them.
Right.
But it was critically important to not come to a standstill on January 1st, 2000, so we had to do that. One of the other things we talked about was I think you called it a tech recovery plan.
The TRPs.
We talked about the issue that all the departments have backup and recovery coordinators, and they have privacy coordinators and all this other thing. And now there's, and as we also discussed, all department heads have to sign off that they've done all these backups and recoveries and all this disaster recovery. And it's questionable whether they've all been done. So what's the plan to address that issue?
So this is not new. It's just the name has changed. We're called disaster recovery plans. Have been changed to technology recovery plans to kind of distinguish them from the business continuity, if you will. It's always been a requirement for agencies to submit those to Peter's office, OIS. Every year they have to sign off and say, we have a technology recovery plan, and here it is. So your statement, probably valid. There's, arguable whether or not they were valid, okay? But now they're being reviewed, and Peter's office has got folks specifically now looking at them to review them, because it's not just doing the plan, it's are they practicing the plan as well. So there is oversight on that now, much more, more eyes on, but Peter's office is doing a great job of that, and they've got a good plan put in place for this year.
That reminds me of something else. The whole snafu over the previous CISO, and during a legislative hearing, there was questions about how much money is being spent on security and how much being spent on cybersecurity, what's being spent now. Why do you want more money when you don't know what your budget is now? That's really a big issue, isn't it? And now I guess that's what Peter said when he was on the show last month, that they're now departments are required to report that each year, how much they spend on security.
Yes, new requirement. It's always been that you had to report what you're spending on IT specifically. Now it's one step further. You have to, every entity is required to report what you're spending on security. So that there's eyes on to make sure that, if something does happen.
Yeah, and you and I were talking about it. I thought it was July 1st, I thought Peter said, but it may be sooner than that.
Yeah, I'm not going to. I thought it was January, but you told me July. It could be.
Yeah, it's one or the other. Because I know the one that's the previous one is due in February.
Right. So that's the IT cost plan, I think it's called.
Yes. So I assume that's the vehicle they're going to use.
Yeah. It's a separate and distinct specific thing, but it would not surprise me that it's July, because that's obviously the beginning of the fiscal year. So
yeah, that'll be interesting to see. I have to get out our FOIA request for that information, huh?
John, you're trying to get me in trouble.
No. I'm just passionate about good government here on Tech Leader TV. Let's see. You talked about the anonymous thing. Okay, here's the other thing. SOCs. Security Operations Centers. Yeah.
Okay.
SOC. We first heard about those, I think it was DMV, probably 2 years ago, when Bernard Soriano and his director Gene were on the program, and they were building one. And I know there must be others going on, and I think I've heard you say, and correct me if I'm wrong, that every organization, at least of a certain size, should have a SOC.
Sure.
Elaborate on that a little bit.
So, and this is, there's the argument for it. What does each one of them do? And the biggest thing is, are they coordinating and kind of elevating up? So every entity should have, whether it's a formalized or not a formalized, be able to have folks or an operations center, security operations center, that's looking at and looking through issues that come, cyber incidents or vulnerabilities that they catch or whatever. Now, you and I both know there are very few agencies that have the resources and the money to do that. So, but for the ones that do, the keys are, what is their relationship to the State Security Operations Center that Peter's standing up, and obviously the Cal-CSIC SOC. So that coordinating piece is the big essential thing that Peter and I are working through to make sure that we have eyes on and understand, and we're coordinating with all of those agency SOCs. And yes, DMV has one. But what we're trying to do, Peter and I both collectively and singly, depending on who we're dealing with, is to ensure that all of our coordination with any type of security operations center is fluid, and again, the anonymity is kept in that, but also, from my perspective, help coordinating incident response for all of them. And that's where the keys come in, that you have to have that great communication link to and from, going both ways.
Are there other department SOCs on the drawing board these days? I mean, does FTB have one? Most the larger agencies, I would assume?
Yeah, and I apologize off the top of my head. I know that there are other agencies that have them, but I don't have them off the top of my head. There's a couple of them out there.
Yeah, it seems to me there's at least a half a dozen or more. Mostly the larger ones, like you would
well, I mean, if
imagine.
you think about the bigger agencies, especially FTB, having federal tax data and those kinds of things. DMV, obviously, because of their huge mission to the public.
Well, it's interesting you said, we're going to finish up here in just a couple of minutes, but not to throw a wrench into things, but your SAC is funded through the federal government, right? And then you got sanctuary cities over here, and then you got Donald Trump. That should be an interesting few months to see what happens with that, with terms of any kind of grant funding for the state.
It will be.
I'm sure it's going to be worked out somehow. But
the one thing that I would offer to you is it's law enforcement and homeland security specific, and that's what our focus is. And I'm pretty confident that everything is going to be okay. But
I think you're probably right in that aspect of it.
But I stay out of that part of it. It's one of those.
You want to make any public statement about the administration? In other words?
Never.
Oh, well, listen, this has been really, anything else you want to tell us about? You got any special awards or employees or anybody else you want to say hello to, and the folks back home before we conclude this?
No, I will tell you that I truly appreciate, our executive sponsors. And again, we wouldn't be where we are without the vision of Secretary Badger and Director Guiducci and Amy Tong. And then, my partner in crime, Eli Owen, who's the deputy STAC commander, and then Justin, who also started this thing. They put together the CalCSIC from scratch. And they got everything moving forward so that I could come in and kind of lean forward and be moving. So I want to just say that I appreciate all the work that they did to put this together. Now it's our job to keep the ball moving forward, and the resilience and the maturity of the state is the biggest priorities, are the two biggest priorities for us. So, and I really appreciate all of the partnerships I have, but more specifically, again, to Scott Hallen, CHP, Peter Liebert as the CISO, and then Colonel Parsons and Ken Foster from the military department.
Well, it certainly is obvious to anyone, particularly that watches Tech Leader TV, that the change over the last year and a half is demonstrable. I mean, it's really, really strides ahead of where it was previously, and that's commendable. That's something we'd like to see on the Tech Leader TV.
Yeah, and you've got, Peter is a younger, energetic guy, very smart, very detail-oriented, and that's huge. And a lot of the things he's doing, I'm just sitting back and on and saying, hey, great stuff. As you mentioned, we've come, we're making strides here, and as also mentioned on the tour, we're trying to manage expectations and not try to jump too far ahead of ourselves. But, our success will be measured on how much we've mitigated and or kept the state from being in the news and that kind of thing. So that's we take that very seriously.
That's right. No news is good news. Well, are you able to stay for a few more minutes after we close up? Maybe take some questions from the group. Thank you very much for watching. That's gonna wrap it up for today. We're always checking your emails and comments and suggestions on future guests and topics. We've got some great shows coming up the next few months with invited the State Controller and the Secretary of State, along with the CIOs from the Department of Corrections and Department of Patient Health Care, and several interesting ones. We're still negotiating with Lori Ajax, the new Director of the Board of Marijuana Control. That should be interesting. And we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.